Sirius, another masterfully written piece of science fiction by Olaf Stapledon. Amazingly, in this book, although I can't comment because I haven't read everything Stapledon has written, he shows us quite possibly his best portrayal of humanity from a first person perspective, even though it's not technically written in the first person perspective, at least not from Sirius, the main character's point of view. But from that perspective, he manages to show us really the essence of what you can define as humanity, and he does it through the point of view of a creature that is a dog, which merely has its level of intelligence raised to the same level of humanity's. And essentially that is the story of the book. Sirius is an experiment, has the size of his brain increased so that he will develop higher functions, as indeed humans did. And really the book just follows his development right from being a puppy right through the rest of his life, and the various struggles he's had to grapple with his nature, his interactions with humans, the fact that he is essentially the only one of his kind. There are no other super intelligent dogs. It is Stapledon firing on all cylinders as ever. Particularly I enjoyed about the book was Sirius grappling with spirituality and trying to come to terms with what a person is the same questions human beings ask themselves of reality and their place in it. Is there a God? Is there more to what we see every day? That, oddly enough, you wouldn't expect that from Stapledon, because he does strike you as a very scientifically minded individual. But reading this book, you really get a sense of a spiritual side in Stapledon, and especially so in this book, and it's hinted in his other works as well. You get a sense of the conflict within Stapledon between essentially the scientist and the spiritualist, and really that's what he gives to Sirius, a dog which is raised by a scientist and is encouraged to think and dissect the world in scientific terms, but ultimately is more and more so looking at it in terms of spiritual terms. And that's where a lot of the conflict in the book comes from. I mean, it's not just in Sirius, it's in Stapledon's other works, quite profoundly so in Star Maker, in which we actually meet the Star Maker, which is Stapledon's version of what we would define as God, or the Creator. And chiefly also with Star Maker, the fact that in the book we do meet the Star Maker, it's told on a vast scale, and it deals with a vast scale in terms of the story it's telling. And the same is true also of Last and First Men, Stapledon's projected history of the rise and fall of mankind, and also with Odd John. And this book is centered around the main character John, but even so ultimately ends up telling quite a vast international worldwide story when John interacts with the other Homo superior or superhumans. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is these are all quite vast in their scale of the stories they're telling, whereas with Sirius, it's a very intimate story. We don't leave Sirius. It's always Sirius and Sirius' point of view on something, and Sirius' life, which geographically doesn't go that far out into the world. It is, I think, Stapledon's. When I say small work, I don't mean to diminish its quality in any way, but certainly it's Stapledon. I think Stapledon taking a step back from the vast scale of some of his other works and ideas, and really just focusing in on and trying to come to terms with the everyday essence or actions or contemplations of what it is to be a human being, or a creature that has been encouraged to think and feel like a human being, but ultimately struggles with that. There's a conflict within that person, and I think certainly it is something Stapledon quite clearly grappled with throughout his life. If you look at his works, his non-fiction works as well. So it is an incredibly intimate story, and very much, I think, Stapledon's attempt at defining what humanity is as it exists in its current form. Now, this was written during the Second World War, so it's a little old, but certainly reading it, it's still, again, and this is quite creepy when reading Stapledon's works, it still feels contemporary in an odd way. Yeah, there are a few details that don't match up because it's a different time period, but ultimately it's a universal story that is timeless, and you can still, even now, sympathise with Sirius and his journey and the story that is told by Stapledon. So yeah, once again, this is solid science fiction, solid Stapledon. Highly recommend it. It will really make you think about what it means to be human and how you define yourself as a human, how you act as a human, and because of that, I would highly recommend it as really required reading. And yeah, and I think also, just one final point, I think you'll enjoy it slightly differently to Stapledon's other works, because in this book, this was written much later on than, well, these three at least, and a few other of his works, and reading this, you get a sense of how Stapledon has matured as a writer, and this one feels much more literary in the sense that, not that these weren't literary, but in the sense that he does dwell more so on those little features. It's set in Wales, and he does talk about the Welsh countryside and the hills and the nature, and he does really paint a much more vibrant and detailed portrait of the landscape in which the story takes place, opposed to just throwing constant sways of ideas at you. He does build scenes and create some quite vibrant imagery within the book. And yeah, just one other point briefly with this book, because it is an intimate story, quite a small scale story. This could be a bit of a turn-off, because Stapledon has become known for his grand sweeping epics of the universe and mankind. And one of the criticisms I had of Odd John, which I've got to put into my video review of it, was that when I finished it, to me it felt a bit unfinished, in that there's so much more Stapledon could have done with the paradigm of this story and the central figure of being a supernormal, and all the other potential stories he could have told around that and scenarios he could have put the main character in. But ultimately, I think that kind of adds to the overriding oddness of the whole book and the protagonists. But anyway, coming back to Sirius, you could argue the same is true of this book. You have quite a unique protagonist who can present unique opportunities for different types of stories, and you could argue that this is a bit light on how far it could have been pushed, but ultimately I don't think this book needs anything more. I think Stapledon has nailed it in with what he has written, and the life course he shows us of Sirius's journey. And ultimately this is a book about an observation of what it is to be human, and I think in this book Stapledon really finally nails it bang on the head. So I highly recommend it because of that.